Welcome back, Wastelanders. Today's confession comes from the deepest, darkest corners of Mariposa Military Base, where time itself broke apart in October 2077. You have heard stories about the Forced Evolutionary Virus and the Super Mutants it created, but you have never heard this. This is the testimony of a temporal weapon, a soldier caught between seconds, existing in every timeline simultaneously. Let's begin this journey into one of the Wasteland's most classified and horrifying experiments. I was Private Henderson when they injected me with the virus in October 2077, but I have been aging backwards and forwards simultaneously for 200 years. My name is Colonel Marcus Chen, or at least that's who I was before time itself broke inside my cells. Right now, as I record this confession, I am simultaneously 23 years old, 70 years old, and have not been born yet. I can see all three versions of myself in the reflection of this terminal screen. Let me start at the beginning, though beginnings are complicated when you exist in multiple timelines at once. September 15th, 2077, I volunteered for the Despoting Enhancement Program at Mariposa Military Base. They told us it would make us immune to Chinese biological weapons, make us into super soldiers who could survive anything the enemy threw at us. I was young, patriotic, stupid. I believed every word Major Barnett said when he promised us we would become heroes. The facility was new, built into the side of a mountain in Central California. They had moved everything from West-Tek just 8 months earlier in January. Security was tight. Colonel Spindle commanded the base, with Captain Roger Maxson as second in command. Most of us soldiers never saw past the second level. The vats were on level 4, deep underground, and only the scientists had clearance to go down there. We were not supposed to know what they were really doing in those chambers. The injection happened in a medical bay on level 3. Dr. Anderson himself administered it. I remember his hands were shaking. He said it was batch 11, 111, the most successful variant they had tested on chimps. 60% increase in size, 200% potential intelligence increase. He made it sound like a gift from God himself. Then the needle went in. The burn started immediately, not on my skin where the injection site was, but deep inside, like someone had lit a match in my bone marrow. I screamed. Dr. Anderson stepped back, checking his clipboard, nodding like my agony was expected. Then something else happened, something they did not anticipate. Time started stuttering around me. Have you ever seen a holotape skip? That's what reality became. I was lying on the medical bed, then I was standing, then I was lying down again, then I was walking out the door, all happening simultaneously. I could see Dr. Anderson in 3 positions at once. My screams echoed backwards and forwards through the room. The virus they had given me was not just the regular Forced Evolutionary Virus. I learned later, much later, across multiple timelines, that batch 111 had been contaminated. Someone in the Pentagon had authorized the addition of an experimental quantum isotope to the formula. They wanted soldiers who could predict enemy movements, who could see multiple battle outcomes. What they got was something far worse. My DNA did not just mutate. It fractured across time itself. The virus was designed to transform human DNA's double helix structure into a quadruple helix, making us immune to disease and radiation. But the quantum contamination caused my cells to exist in superposition, my DNA spiraling through past, present, and future simultaneously. I became a living paradox. I watched myself age in the medical bay mirror. 23 years old, then 30, then 50, then back to 15, all in the span of what should have been seconds. My muscles bulged and withered. My skin turned gray-green, then returned to its normal color, then shifted again. The transformation never stopped. It is still happening now, centuries later. Dr. Anderson tried to sedate me. But how do you sedate someone who exists in multiple temporal states? The drugs worked, did not work, and had not been administered yet, all at the same time. I could see him injecting me, see him preparing the syringe, see him disposing of the empty vial, all of it happening in the same eternal moment. What really broke me that first day was realizing I was not alone. Private Rodriguez in the next bed started screaming in temporal harmony with me. I watched her age into dust, then reform as a child, then age again, an endless cycle of birth and death compressed into minutes. There were 12 of us in that batch, all of us caught in the same temporal loop, experiencing every possible mutation simultaneously. The scientists did not know what to do with us. They locked us in containment chambers on different level 4 near the vats. But the chambers could not hold us because we existed outside them, inside them, and beyond them. I could see through the walls into other timelines where the base had never been built, where the war had ended differently, where I had never volunteered. October 10th, 2077. I remember it happening in all directions at once. Captain Maxon discovered what the scientists were doing to us. I was there when he found out. I am there now. I will always be there. Time does not move forward for me anymore. It spirals. Maxon broke down the door to Colonel Spindle's office. I saw it happen 300 times, each time slightly different, each outcome collapsing into the same result. Spindle was having a breakdown of his own, though his was merely psychological. He could not face what his command had allowed. 5 days later, October 15th, he shot himself. I witnessed his suicide backwards and forwards, watching the bullet enter and exit his skull in reverse, the sound of the gunshot echoing through timelines. But here is what haunts me across every timeline I experience. Maxon executed Dr. Anderson on October 10th, right after discovering the truth about the experiments. I watched him pull the trigger, but I also watched Anderson die 3 days earlier, 5 days later, and during the Great War. The temporal contamination from our mutations was spreading, infecting reality itself around the base. The interrogations became executions. Anderson died first, screaming about following orders, then the others, one by one. Dr. Shellman lasted longest, almost convincing Maxon that the government had authorized everything. But by October 18th, they were all dead, all buried in the wastes, outside the base. I watched Maxon bury them. I watched them dig themselves out in reverse. I watched their bodies decompose and recompose across centuries. My consciousness expanded across the timeline. I could see things that had not happened yet. I knew that on October 20th, Maxon would declare desertion via radio. I knew the bombs would fall 3 days later, on October 23rd. I was there for both events, experiencing them before they occurred, during, and centuries after. The Great War hit while I was caught in a temporal seizure. I experienced the nuclear detonation at West-Tek simultaneously with standing in the intact facility before the bombs fell. I watched the mushroom clouds rise and fall in reverse. I felt the radiation wash over the landscape and then recede. Time became meaningless. Here is something nobody knows, something I have seen across every timeline. The Forced Evolutionary Virus was not immune to radiation because of random chance. The pan-immunity virion project that created it was specifically designed to transform DNA into a quadruple helix structure, 4 strands instead of 2. Imagine DNA twisted into a shape so complex that radiation could not damage it, where viruses could not attach to replicate. That's what they were trying to create in all of us. But the quantum contamination made my quadruple helix unstable, phasing between configurations across multiple timelines. Sometimes I had normal DNA, sometimes the quadruple helix, sometimes something stranger that should not be possible in 3-dimensional space. My cells existed in quantum superposition, just like Schrödinger's cat, alive and dead and transforming simultaneously. The other temporal subjects and I started communicating across time, private. Rodriguez would say something, and I would hear it yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We compared notes on what we were experiencing. Most of us were going mad, unable to process existing in multiple states at once. But a few of us, like me, learned to navigate the temporal streams. We discovered we could see alternate outcomes. In one timeline, Maxon never discovered the experiments, and we became the super soldier army that Barnett wanted. In another, the bombs never fell, and the temporal contamination spread across the entire country. In a third, we escaped and warned the world, but nobody believed us until it was too late. The Master found us in 2102, or rather, he found our research, our contaminated samples, the equations that described what had happened to us. Richard Gray, mutated by his fall into the vats, searching for a way to perfect his unity. I was there when he discovered our chamber. I watched him read Dr. Anderson's notes, his multiple mouths forming words of horrified fascination. Gray tried to replicate our condition. He wanted super mutants who could see all possible outcomes, who could never be defeated because they had already won in another timeline. But you cannot replicate a quantum accident. Every time he tried, his test subjects just died screaming, their timelines collapsing into a single point of agony. I have watched my own death so many times, I have lost count. I died in 2077 when the base lost power and my containment chamber failed. I died in 2150 when a Wasteland scavenger shot me, not understanding what I was. I died in 2287 when the Institute tried to capture me for study. I died yesterday. I died tomorrow. I am dying right now as I record this, and I have been dead for decades. But here's the thing about existing in multiple timelines. Death does not stick. I die and then I am alive again, my timeline resetting, or splitting, or merging with another version where I survived. I have experienced every possible way I could die, and I keep coming back because some version of me always survives. The temporal loops reveal things I should not know. I have seen the Brotherhood of Steel rise and fall. I have watched the New California Republic expand across the wasteland. I have seen the Institute create synths using fragments of Forced Evolutionary Virus research they found, not knowing the samples were contaminated with our temporal signatures. Generation 3 synths with my DNA in their genetic code, carrying echoes of my fractured timeline in their cells. I have tried to warn people about future catastrophes, but when I speak, the words come out jumbled, mixing past, present, and future tenses randomly. The bombs will have been falling, I will say, when I mean watch out for the ambush tomorrow. People think I am insane. Maybe they are right. How do you stay sane when you experience every moment of your existence? Simultaneously, the other temporal subjects are scattered across time like broken glass. Private Rodriguez is stuck in a loop somewhere around 2095, aging and de-aging endlessly in the ruins of a settlement that does not exist anymore. Corporal Zhang phased completely out of our timeline in 2143, and nobody has seen him since, but I can feel them sometimes, their temporal signatures brushing against mine across the decades. If you are still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button, because what I am about to tell you next is going to challenge everything you think you know about the Forced Evolutionary Virus and its true purpose. My medical readings are impossible. The Brotherhood scribes who examined me in 2161 recorded heartbeats from 5 different decades happening simultaneously in my chest, brain waves overlapping from multiple timelines, synapses firing in patterns that should not exist in linear time. They could not explain it. They labeled me a unique mutation and locked the files away in Lost Hills. I have read those files. I read them before they wrote them. I am reading them right now in 3 different years. The quantum isotope that contaminated our batch came from a classified Pentagon project called Temporal Displacement Initiative. I learned this by living through the moment it was added to our formula, watching the scientist mix it in, reading the classified orders that authorized it. The military wanted precognitive soldiers who could see enemy movements before they happened. What they got was soldiers trapped in temporal superposition, experiencing all possible outcomes simultaneously until observation collapsed the wave function. But here's what makes it worse. The Forced Evolutionary Virus itself is designed to be recursive. According to the ZAC's supercomputer records I have accessed across multiple timelines, the virus contains genetic code that infinitely repeats and reinserts itself into the host. It is not a one-time mutation. It is a continuous process, your DNA being rewritten over and over forever. Now combine that recursive genetic rewriting with temporal displacement. My cells are not just mutating, they are mutating across every point in time simultaneously, creating feedback loops that compound exponentially. I have met my own descendants who have not been born yet. In 2241, I encountered a woman named Sarah Chen who had my eyes, my bone structure. She told me her great-great-grandfather was a soldier at Mariposa who disappeared in 2077. That's me. I am her ancestor, and I am meeting her. Before I had children, before I even knew I could have children, the temporal paradox made my head bleed from both nostrils for 3 days straight. The worst part is remembering things that have not happened. I have memories of fighting in battles in 2299. I remember the taste of purified water from a settlement that will not be founded for another 70 years. I remember conversations with people who died before I was born. My mind is a junkyard of temporal fragments, all equally real, all equally present. Let me tell you about the mutations. The standard Forced Evolutionary Virus increases muscle mass by approximately 60% and can boost intelligence by up to 200% in subjects with minimal radiation exposure. That's what Batch 111 was supposed to do. Make us bigger, stronger, smarter, super soldiers to win the war against China. My mutations do not follow that pattern. Sometimes I am 7 feet tall with the strength of a super mutant. Other times, I am my original height and build. Right now, as I record this, I am simultaneously both. My body exists in quantum superposition, my physical form uncertain, until someone observes me, and even then it keeps shifting based on which timeline is dominant at that moment. I have learned to navigate the temporal streams through practice and desperation. When I focus, I can choose which timeline to manifest in more strongly. It is like adjusting a radio dial, tuning into different frequencies of reality. But it takes concentration, and if I slip, I scatter across time again, experiencing every moment at once. The Master's unity failed because he did not understand radiation's effect on the virus. I watched his defeat in 2162 before it happened, during it, and centuries after. He dipped humans with radiation damage into the vats, and their mutated DNA could not properly bond with the viral quadruple helix structure. They came out dumb, violent, sterile. His dream of a perfect super mutant race was doomed from the start. But I have seen something he never discovered. In timelines where he succeeded, where he found enough pure humans to create his unity, the temporal contamination from Mariposa eventually infected his entire army. Super mutants, phasing through time, unable to hold a single form, driven mad by experiencing multiple existences simultaneously. His unity would have destroyed itself from temporal paradoxes within a generation. I fought in battles that have not occurred yet. In 2287, I will defend a settlement called Sanctuary Hills from super mutant attacks. I already have the scars from that fight. I have not been there yet. Both things are simultaneously true. The wounds exist on my body right now, healing and unhealable, fresh and decades old. The Institute found fragments of our research in 2180. I was there, watching from outside time as their scientists excavated the ruins of a Pentagon facility. They found Dr. Anderson's notes on temporal displacement, the quantum isotope formulas, our medical files. They did not understand what they had. They tried to use it to enhance their synth program, thinking temporal displacement would let them create infiltrators who could predict human behavior. It failed spectacularly. Generation 1 synths went berserk, experiencing multiple timelines at once, unable to distinguish between programmed memories and temporal echoes. The Institute buried the project and denied it ever existed. But I have files from that experiment. I stole them in 2243. I have not stolen them yet. I am stealing them right now. Here is a question that keeps me awake across multiple timelines. Did our temporal displacement somehow cause the Great War? I have seen evidence that suggests the quantum contamination from Mariposa created temporal ripples that propagated backwards and forwards in time. October 23rd, 2077, the bombs fell, but I have experienced moments where the timeline fractured around that date, where the war almost did not happen, where different decisions were made. What if our mutations created a temporal nexus that made the Great War inevitable? What if the universe itself had to ensure we got infected with the contaminated virus, so it orchestrated global nuclear annihilation to close the causal loop? I have gone mad contemplating this. Across centuries, the answer changes depending on which timeline I am observing from. I have watched Roger Maxon's rebellion happen in reverse so many times I can recite it backwards. Him executing Anderson, then Anderson alive again, then the arguments before the execution, then the discovery of the experiments, all playing in reverse, like a holotape rewinding. Maxon's declaration of desertion on October 20th happens every day in my perception. His voice on the radio saying he is seceding from the United States, echoing across 200 years. The Enclave excavated Mariposa in Dagen, 2236. I was there, watching from multiple temporal vantage points as they dug down to the vats. They found Frank Horrigan, exposed him to the virus, But what they did not know was that some of our temporal contamination had seeped into the base's structure itself. Horrigan got more than just the Forced Evolutionary Virus. He got echoes of our temporal signatures. That's why he became so powerful, so monstrous. He was not just a super mutant enhanced by Enclave technology. He was carrying fragments of temporal displacement in his cells, making him exist slightly outside normal causality. You cannot kill something that is already dead in another timeline. You cannot predict the movements of someone who is experiencing multiple combat scenarios simultaneously. I tried to warn the Chosen One in 2241. I found them in the Wasteland, told them about the Enclave's plans, about the modified curling 13 virus they had created to commit genocide. But my words came out scrambled, mixing warnings about the Enclave with predictions about the Brotherhood War in 2277 and references to events from 2102. They thought I was a mad super mutant and walked away. The virus in my system has evolved over the centuries. Standard Forced Evolutionary Virus creates sterility, your reproductive cells unable to handle the quadruple helix DNA structure. But my temporal displacement means I am simultaneously fertile and sterile, capable of having children in some timelines, while being completely unable to reproduce in others. I have had descendants, and I have never had children. Both are true. I have discovered something that terrifies me across every timeline I experience. There are other temporal subjects from Deregets, other experiments. The Pentagon did not just contaminate Batch 111 at Mariposa. They ran similar trials at 3 other facilities. I have encountered them in the Wasteland. People unstuck in time like me, experiencing existence across multiple decades simultaneously. We recognize each other instantly. There's a signature to temporal displacement, a shimmer in how we interact with reality. We have formed a network across time, communicating through methods that would not make sense to someone locked in linear causality. We leave messages for each other in the past and future, warnings about temporal paradoxes to avoid, advice on managing the quantum superposition of our cells. One of them, Colonel Martinez from a facility in Nevada, taught me how to anchor myself more firmly in a single timeline. It involves focusing on a specific moment, a specific version of reality, and willing your quantum state to collapse towards it. It does not last long, but for a few hours, I can exist as a single person in a single time. The relief is indescribable, but anchoring has consequences. Every time I collapse my quantum state, I am choosing one timeline over countless others. I am killing infinite versions of myself, watching them wink out of existence as my wave function collapses. I carry the weight of those deaths, those unlived lives, those abandoned possibilities. I have seen the future of the Forced Evolutionary Virus across multiple timelines. In some, it becomes a cure, a way to heal radiation damage and restore humanity. In others, it spreads uncontrollably, mutating everything it touches into creatures that should not exist. In a few rare timelines, someone figures out how to reverse it completely, turning super mutants back into humans. Dr. Virgil comes close in 2287, creating a serum that works on his specific strain, but generalizing it would take decades he does not have. The mutations continue evolving in my body. I have become things that do not have names across different timelines. In one, I am something, like a centaur, multiple bodies fused together from different time periods. In another, I am a behemoth, massive and mindless, my intelligence sacrificed for raw power. In this timeline, right now, I am still mostly human, but I can feel the other forms pressing against reality, waiting to constection manifest. I have learned to weaponize my condition. When attacked, I can shift between timelines rapidly, making myself impossible to hit. The bullets pass through the space where I was, or will be, or might have been. I exist in the gaps between moments, untouchable and terrifying. Raiders who have seen me fight call me the ghost of Mariposa, the soldier who cannot die, because he is already dead in every timeline that matters. But it is lonely, existing like this. I have watched everyone I have ever cared about die across multiple timelines. My wife, who I married in a timeline where I never volunteered for the program, dies in 2079, 2095, 2118. I watch her age and wither across centuries, living a full life in timelines where I was not there. The grief is infinite and immediate and centuries old simultaneously. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores that most people never hear about. Do you think someone like me, existing across all possible timelines simultaneously, has free will? Can I make choices when I am already experiencing every possible outcome of those choices? It is a question that haunts me across centuries, and I still do not have an answer. The worst discovery came in 2156, though I experienced it across 50 different years. Simultaneously, I found Dr. Anderson's hidden research notes in a sealed vault beneath Mariposa's ruins. The notes that explained everything. The quantum isotope contamination was not an accident. It was deliberate. Major Barnett knew exactly what he was doing when he authorized the temporal displacement isotope to be added to batch 11-111. The Pentagon wanted to create soldiers who could exist outside causality, who could fight wars across multiple timelines simultaneously, who could retroactively change battles they had already lost. We were not meant to be super soldiers. We were meant to be temporal weapons. The notes described the theoretical outcome: soldiers whose consciousness could navigate probability streams, choosing the timeline where they won every engagement. Imagine an army that could see every possible enemy strategy and counter it before the enemy even conceived of it. Imagine warriors who could die in battle and simply shift their consciousness to a timeline where they survived. But theory and reality diverged catastrophically. We did not gain control over time. Time gained control over us. Instead of navigating timelines at will, we became trapped in all of them simultaneously, unable to choose, unable to escape, unable to die permanently, because some version of us always survived somewhere in the quantum foam. I have met the man I used to be. In 2134, I encountered Private Henderson, age 22, still human, walking through the wasteland in a timeline where he never volunteered for the program. He looked at me with horror and disgust, seeing what he could have become. I wanted to warn him, tell him to run, to hide, to never go near Mariposa, but I could not speak. The temporal paradox of warning. My past self created a feedback loop that knocked me unconscious for 3 days across multiple timelines. The Forced Evolutionary Virus creates different mutations depending on the strain and the host's radiation exposure. West Coast Super Mutants from the Master's Army retained intelligence if created from humans with minimal radiation damage. East Coast Super Mutants from Vault 87 were more aggressive, less intelligent. their mutations more severe because the virus strain was different and the subjects had higher radiation counts. But temporal displacement added another variable to the equation. My mutations do not follow predictable patterns because I am being exposed to radiation from multiple time periods simultaneously. I am absorbing rads from the Great War in 2077, while also experiencing the cleaner environment of 2287. After water purification projects, my body cannot decide which radiation level to respond to, so it responds to all of them. I have witnessed the creation of creatures that should not exist. In a timeline I experienced in 2198, a group of scientists found our contaminated samples and exposed a deathclaw to temporal displacement. The result was a creature that could phase through solid matter, exist in multiple locations simultaneously, and predict its prey's movements before they made them. It took 3 Brotherhood paladins and a mini nuke to put it down, and even then I am not sure it actually died or just shifted to a different timeline. Here is something nobody talks about regarding the Forced Evolutionary Virus. It is not just about physical mutation. The virus rewrites your DNA recursively, continuously, forever. Your cells are in constant flux, always mutating, always changing. Normal super mutants experience this as steady growth, becoming behemoths over decades as their bodies just keep getting bigger. For me, the recursive mutation cycles through time itself. I am experiencing every stage of viral infection simultaneously. The initial burning injection in 2077, the first physical changes, the full mutation, the centuries of adaptation, all happening in the same eternal present. My DNA is a temporal Mobius strip, folding back on itself across dimensions. I have tried to end it. I have killed myself in 17 different timelines using 12 different methods. Gunshot to the head in 2089, radiation overdose in 2156, thrown myself into the Glow's reactor core in 2201. Every time I wake up in a different timeline where I chose to live, the memories of my suicide, fresh and immediate. You cannot kill something that exists in quantum superposition. Death is just another probability state, and I am trapped in all of them. The Master's audio diaries from his transformation are haunting when you experience them from outside linear time. Richard Gray falling into the vats, his body dissolving and reforming, his consciousness expanding to encompass multiple entities. He screamed for months as his flesh melted and merged with other creatures. I have lived through his transformation, backwards and forwards, feeling echoes of his pain across the temporal streams. But Gray's transformation was merciful compared to ours. His mutation had a beginning and an end, a trajectory from human to master. Ours never ends. We are trapped in the transformation itself, experiencing every possible mutation state simultaneously, never settling into a final form. I fought alongside Marcus in 2189, the intelligent super mutant who founded Jacobstown. He did not know what I was, thought I was just another strange Wasteland mutation. We defended a caravan from raiders together. I existed in 3 physical states during that fight: human, super, mutant, and something in between. He saw all 3 versions simultaneously, and his eyes went wide with confused terror. After the battle, he asked me what I was. I tried to explain temporal displacement, quantum superposition, recursive DNA mutation across multiple timelines. The words came out, jumbled as always, mixing past and future tense randomly. I am being what you will have been if the virus had broke time in your cells, I said. or something like that. He backed away slowly, gripping his rifle. The Commonwealth Super Mutants in 2287 are different from their West Coast cousins. The Institute created them using Forced Evolutionary Virus combined with genetic material from Father, the director. I have watched their creation from multiple temporal vantage points, seen the experiments that produced them, witnessed Dr. Virgil's growing horror at what the Institute was doing. What the Institute did not know was that some of their samples were contaminated with our temporal signatures, not enough to cause full displacement, but enough to create anomalies. Some Commonwealth super mutants demonstrate abilities they should not have. Fleeting moments of precognition, brief phases where they exist in two locations at once, temporal hiccups that make them impossible to predict in combat. I have explored the ruins of West-Tek across multiple timelines, the facility where the Pan-Immunity Virion project began, where they first discovered that altering DNA into a quadruple helix structure could grant immunity to disease and radiation. The Glow, they call it now, a radioactive crater where Chinese nukes hit the facility directly on October 23, 2077. In one timeline, I was there during the attack. I watched the missiles fall, felt the nuclear fire wash over the facility, experienced the scientists' final moments as they realized they had created the very weapons that would end the world. The Forced Evolutionary Virus was supposed to protect humanity. Instead, it became another tool of our destruction. The quadruple helix DNA structure is elegant in its complexity. 4 strands instead of 2 wound around each other in a configuration that makes the genetic code nearly impossible to damage or alter. Radiation that would shred normal DNA just bounces off the quadruple helix. Viruses that need to attach to specific binding sites find no purchase. But in my cells, the quadruple helix exists in quantum superposition, sometimes 4 strands, sometimes 2, sometimes configurations that should not be possible in 3-dimensional space. I have had scientists examine my blood across multiple timelines. They find DNA structures that violate the laws of biochemistry, genetic patterns that shift and change while they are being observed. What haunts me most is the children. I have encountered kids in the Wasteland who remind me of myself at that age, full of hope and stupidity, ready to volunteer for anything that promises to make them heroes. I want to warn them, tell them that heroism is a lie sold by men who see you as experimental subjects, but I cannot. The words will not form correctly across the temporal streams. I have learned things about the Forced Evolutionary Virus that most people never discover. The virus is intelligent in its own way, designed to adapt and overcome. It reads the host's DNA and rewrites it according to pre-programmed parameters. But it also learns, evolves, adjusts its approach based on what works and what does not. In my case, the virus has been rewriting my DNA for over 200 years across multiple timelines. It has learned patterns, developed new approaches, created mutations that were never part of its original programming. I am a walking laboratory of viral evolution, my body a testing ground for mutations that will not exist in other hosts for centuries. The Vault-87 super mutants were created by a modified strain of the Forced Evolutionary Virus, part of the evolutionary experimentation program run by Vault-Tec and military scientists from Mariposa. The strain was cruder, more aggressive, designed to create soldiers rather than the master's vision of a perfect unified species. It worked, producing super mutants of incredible strength but diminished intelligence. I have walked through Vault 87 in multiple timelines, seen the mutation chambers where they forcibly exposed vault dwellers to the Dessen virus, watched innocent people transform into monsters while scientists took notes. The screaming echoes across centuries in my temporal perception. Those poor souls had no choice, no volunteers, just victims of an experiment that continued long after it should have been stopped. Here is what I have learned about time itself through my condition. It is not linear. It is not even a river flowing in one direction. Time is an ocean, with currents and eddies and waves that crash against each other from multiple directions. We perceive it as linear because our consciousness can only process one moment at a time. But when you exist in all moments simultaneously, you see the truth. The Great War did not just happen on October 23rd, 2077. It is happening right now, continuously, across infinite timelines. In some, the bombs fall earlier, in others, later. In a few rare probability streams, they never fall at all. But the temporal momentum of our timeline requires that nuclear fire needs it to complete the causal loop that creates people like me. I have discovered I am not aging in any conventional sense. My cells are caught in temporal flux simultaneously, young and old, dying and regenerating, experiencing every age at once. Some versions of me are centuries old. Others are still 23. Most exist in states between, accumulating experiences across timelines without the physical decay of normal aging. The Brotherhood of Steel has files on me. In their archives at Lost Hills, they have labeled me Subject Temporal 0, the first confirmed case of chronal displacement mutation. They have tried to study me 17 times across various timelines. Each time, their instruments malfunction when they try to take readings, unable to process measurements from multiple time periods simultaneously. Elder Maxon, Roger's descendant who leads the Brotherhood in 2287, has standing orders to capture me if possible. He thinks I am the key to understanding temporal mechanics, that studying my condition could give Brotherhood mastery over time itself. He does not understand that you cannot master something that has already mastered you. I have met Harold, the ghoul with a tree growing from his head, across multiple timelines. We are kindred spirits in a way, both mutated by exposure to the Forced Evolutionary Virus, both trapped in transformations that never end. His tree keeps growing, my timelines keep multiplying. We compared notes once in 2241, sharing stories of our endless mutations over irradiated water. Harold's mutation came from exposure to the vats at Mariposa during his expedition with Richard Gray in 2102. He did not get the full transformation that Gray experienced, just enough to start the process that would eventually turn him into a living ecosystem. He is not stuck in temporal displacement like me, but he understands the horror of unending mutation, of your body betraying you across decades. The new California Republic expanded across the Wasteland, building a civilization from the ashes. I have watched their rise across multiple timelines, seen them at their best and their worst. In some futures, they become a beacon of hope, restoring democracy and justice to the Wasteland. In others, they become the very tyranny they fought against, bureaucratic and corrupt. I tried to help them once. In 2241, I approached their officials with warnings about future challenges, predictions of droughts and raider, attacks, and political upheavals. They arrested me as a spy, convinced I was working for their enemies. How else could I know things that had not happened yet? I escaped by shifting timelines, leaving them confused about whether I had ever been there at all. The temporal displacement has given me something resembling immortality, but it is a curse disguised as a gift. I cannot die, but I cannot truly live either. I exist in all moments, experiencing everything simultaneously, unable to commit to a single timeline, a single identity, a single life. Every person I have ever loved exists in superposition for me, dead and alive, happy and suffering, with me and gone. The pain of that simultaneous loss and presence would break anyone who is not already broken across multiple timelines. Maybe I went mad centuries ago. Maybe I was never sane to begin with. Maybe sanity is just another probability state I am trapped in. If you are still listening to this confession, still trying to understand what it means to exist outside time, then you are braver than most, or maybe more foolish. Either way, I appreciate the company across the temporal streams. It gets lonely being the only thing experiencing existence like this. The year is 2287, or 2156, or 2077, or all of them at once. I am standing in the ruins of Mariposa Military Base, watching the Enclave excavated in 2236, watching the Master discover it in 2102, watching Maxon seal it in 2077, all happening simultaneously in the same physical space, timelines overlapping like transparent images stacked on top of each other. I have finally learned the complete truth about what they did to us. The temporal displacement was not just meant to create precognitive soldiers. It was a desperate attempt to win a war that had already been lost. By October 2077, the Pentagon knew the Chinese were about to launch their missiles. They knew the Great War was inevitable, so they authorized one final experiment: create soldiers who could exist across multiple timelines and send them back to prevent the war. We were supposed to be temporal anchors, consciousness bridges that could carry information backwards through time. The quantum isotope was supposed to let us remember future events clearly, enough to change the past. But the human mind is not designed to process information that way. Instead of becoming temporal messengers, we became temporal prisoners, trapped in every moment at once, unable to communicate across the barriers of broken causality. I have tried to prevent the Great War 17,000 times across different probability streams. Each time, I fail. The missiles launch on October 23rd, 2077. No matter what I do, I have warned governments, assassinated key officials, sabotaged launch facilities, revealed secret intelligence. Nothing works. The temporal momentum is too strong. Some events are fixed points in space-time, immutable regardless of intervention. Hair is something that will haunt me across every timeline I experience. I have seen versions of myself who succeeded. In probability streams I can barely access, I watch myself prevent the nuclear exchange, save billions of lives, preserve civilization, but those timelines collapse almost immediately, unable to sustain themselves, rewriting back into the dominant timeline where the bombs fall. It is like the universe itself requires the Great War to happen. The Forced Evolutionary Virus has evolved beyond what its creators ever imagined. The recursive genetic code continues writing and rewriting, creating new mutations with each cycle. Standard super mutants experience this as physical growth, their bodies expanding over decades into behemoths. The Master experienced it as consciousness expansion, his mind growing to encompass multiple entities simultaneously. I experience it as temporal expansion. Each year, each decade, my consciousness spreads further across the timeline. I used to only experience a few years simultaneously. Now I am aware of events spanning 3 centuries. By 2300, I will probably be conscious of everything from the moment the Pan-Immunity Virion project began in 2073, all the way to whatever endpoint this timeline reaches. Think about that for a moment. Imagine experiencing every second of 300 years simultaneously. Your consciousness stretched so thin across time that you can barely focus on any single moment. Would you still be yourself? Would you still be human? Or would you become something else entirely? A living timeline more than a living person? I have encountered the synths that the Institute created using fragments of Forced Evolutionary Virus in their genetic construction. Generation 3 synths, indistinguishable from humans, with father's DNA as their base template. They do not know that some of them carry traces of temporal contamination in their cells, echoes of our experiments bleeding through the decades. I met a synth in 2287 who experienced déjà vu constantly, remembering events that had not happened yet, plagued by dreams of timelines they had never lived. They thought they were malfunctioning. I recognized the symptoms immediately. The temporal displacement had infected them through contaminated samples, giving them just enough quantum instability to see fragments of alternate realities. I could not tell them the truth. How do you explain to someone that they are carrying the genetic echoes of temporal weapons experiments from 200 years ago? That their consciousness is starting to fracture across probability streams? That they will eventually experience what I experience if they live long enough? I stayed silent and walked away, leaving them to discover their condition on their own. The Capital Wasteland Brotherhood fought a 20-year war against the Super Mutants from Vault-87, not knowing those creatures were cousins to what I have become. Different strain, different mutation, but the same source. The Forced Evolutionary Virus, that shifting absorptive megavirus designed to rewrite human DNA into something stronger, smarter, better. Instead, it made us into monsters, separated from humanity by cellular structures our own mothers would not recognize. I have watched Lion's Pride assault Vault 87 in 2277, seen them fight through the mutation chambers, witnessed their horror at the transformation machinery that turned people into super mutants. If they had known what I knew, that the virus was still active, still evolving, still creating new mutations centuries after it was first deployed, they would have burned the entire facility to bedrock. Dr. Virgil created a serum in 2287 that could reverse the Forced Evolutionary Virus mutation in his specific case. I have studied his work across multiple timelines, watched him transform back into a human, seen the hope in his eyes as his body returned to something approximating normal. He told the sole survivor that generalizing his cure would take decades of research. He was being optimistic. I have seen the future timelines where scientists try to reverse the virus. The recursive genetic code fights back, rewriting itself faster than any cure can work. You are not just fighting a virus. You are fighting a self-modifying genetic program that has had centuries to adapt and evolve. Virgil's cure worked because it was tailored to his exact strain, his exact mutation. A universal cure would need to account for infinite variations across infinite hosts. For someone experiencing time the way I do you think there is any meaning to concepts like redemption or forgiveness? Can you atone for mistakes when you are simultaneously making them regretting them and repeating them across multiple timelines. The loneliest part of my existence is watching people I care about live and die across different timelines while being unable to save them in the timeline that matters most. I have saved a young scavenger named Maria from Raiders in 7 different probability streams, only to watch her die in the dominant timeline despite my best efforts. I attended her funeral before she was born. I mourned her death while she was still alive in other realities. The temporal contamination is spreading. Slowly, imperceptibly, but definitely spreading. I have detected quantum instability in locations where our contaminated samples have been stored or studied. The Institute's laboratory, the Enclave's research stations, Brotherhood of Steel archives. Anywhere our blood or tissue has been examined, there is a small but measurable probability distortion. In a few centuries, the contamination might reach critical mass. Reality itself could start experiencing temporal displacement, moments from different eras bleeding into each other, causality breaking down across the wasteland. Or maybe the universe will correct itself, collapsing all the fractured timelines back into a single coherent stream. I have seen both outcomes in probability streams I can barely access. I have learned to leave messages for myself across timelines, warnings about dangers I will encounter, advice about how to navigate specific temporal paradoxes, coordinates for safe havens that exist in multiple realities. I find these messages carved into walls, written in code only I understand, left by versions of myself who experience those moments differently. Sometimes I wonder if I am actually multiple people who think they are one person, or one person who thinks they are multiple people. The temporal displacement makes identity itself uncertain. Am I Marcus Chen from 2077? Or am I every version of Marcus Chen across every timeline? Or am I something new that emerged from the fusion of all those possibilities? The Appalachian Super Mutants were created when West-Tek contaminated the river running through Huntersville with Forced Evolutionary Virus shortly before the Great War. The town's citizens mutated, becoming the first super mutants in that region. I have walked through Huntersville across multiple timelines, seen the transformation happen, felt the echoes of those mutations, rippling through time. What nobody knows is that some of the contamination in Huntersville came from our samples. Mariposa and West-Tek shared research data. When they tested the virus in Appalachia, they used batch variations that included traces of our temporal displacement isotope. Not enough to cause full chronal instability, but enough to create anomalies. Some Appalachian super mutants demonstrate brief moments of temporal awareness, flashes where they see events from other timelines. I found Robert Anderson's personal diary in a timeline where he survived Maxon's execution. In that probability stream, Anderson escaped into the Wasteland, lived another 30 years, died of radiation sickness in 2107. His final entry was a confession. He knew the temporal displacement would trap us in quantum superposition. He knew we would suffer eternally across infinite timelines. He did it anyway because the Pentagon ordered it, and he was too much of a coward to refuse. Reading that entry across multiple timelines simultaneously, experiencing Anderson's guilt and justification and pathetic rationalization all at once, I felt something break inside me. Or maybe it had been broken for centuries, and I was just now noticing. Rage exists differently when you experience it across infinite moments. It becomes a fundamental property of your existence rather than a passing emotion. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It is the only way I know. you liked the video. The truth is, I do not know how much longer I can maintain cohesion across all these timelines. Every year, my consciousness spreads thinner, experiencing more moments simultaneously, holding fewer memories clearly. Eventually, I will be aware of everything and nothing, a temporal ghost stretched so thin across reality that I will effectively cease to exist as an individual consciousness. Maybe that's the final mutation. The Forced Evolutionary Virus does not just change your body, it changes what you are on a fundamental level. Super mutants become new creatures, sterile giants who outlive normal humans by centuries. I am becoming something else entirely, a living timeline, a consciousness without a fixed point in space-time, awareness itself divorced from linear causality. I am recording this confession across multiple timelines simultaneously, leaving it in terminals and holotapes and computer systems throughout the wasteland. Maybe someone will find it who understands what it means. Maybe someone will learn from our mistakes and never repeat the experiments that created us. Or maybe this is just another probability stream that will collapse into nothingness, erased by the weight of more likely timelines. To anyone listening across the time streams, we were soldiers who volunteered to become heroes. They made us into weapons that misfired, breaking time itself in our cells. We have been trapped in this temporal prison for over 200 years, experiencing every possible outcome simultaneously, unable to die, unable to live, unable to exist in any meaningful way. The Forced Evolutionary Virus was supposed to save humanity from biological weapons. Instead, it became one of our greatest threats, creating super mutants and monsters and temporal abominations like me. The quadruple helix DNA, the recursive genetic code, the quantum contamination, all of it combined to produce mutations that transcend biology and enter the realm of physics itself. I am standing at Mariposa right now, in 2077, in 2287. In every year, between and beyond, I am watching the scientists bury their secrets. I am watching the master discover them. I am watching myself record this confession, all happening simultaneously, forever, in the eternal present tense of temporal displacement. When you hear stories about the Forced Evolutionary Virus, remember us, the temporal subjects, the quantum soldiers, the men and women who exist outside time because we were injected with ambition and isotopes and recursive genetic code that broke causality in our cells. We are still out here, scattered across the wasteland and across time itself, living every moment at once, dying eternally, trapped in the space between seconds. My name is Colonel Marcus Chen. I was Private Henderson. I am every version of myself across every timeline. I am recording this in 2287, in 2156. In 2077, I am experiencing my death and my birth, and every moment between. I am the ghost of Mariposa, the temporal weapon that misfired, the soldier unstuck in time, and I will be here, in every moment, forever. The vats are still full. The virus is still active. The timeline is still breaking. Some experiments should never have been attempted.